Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of the Legal Anchor. Today we'll be talking about the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. And we are here in downtown Kingston. And what is downtown Kingston as we know? We know it to be the maritime capital of Jamaica. Now, with it being the maritime capital of Jamaica, we have the seat of the International Seabed Authority right here. So, the International Seabed Authority is very vital to the whole marine industry because it speaks to how the high seas are to be delimited and how we are to use the space in the high seas and how the high seas themselves have precious manganese nodules that need to be protected. International Seabed Authority oversees all of that. Where did the International Seabed Authority, however, get all of this authority? The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea was signed right here in Montego Bay, Jamaica, nicknamed the Montego Bay Convention. So today we will be discussing the United Nations Convention and how this convention has molded Jamaica.
Welcome once again to the Students Digest. I am your host as usual, Mr. Tyrese Williams, a student like many of you, having an interest in maritime law, of course. Today we have with us again for another episode in the series, Mr. Jermaine Reed, owner of Reed Law and the Transportation Suites.
The legal transportation
Suites. Thank you, sir.
Yes.
The owner as well of the Legal Anchor, very involved attorney in maritime matters. Very, very informative. Today, Mr. Reed, welcome.
Yes, thank you very much once again having me here. It's always a pleasure being here in your studios and being interviewed by you. By some very hard questions. He has a long list of questions there. I just hope I can meet the expectations.
Thank you, Mr. Reed, for being here again. Well,
yes.
Today, guys, we will be discussing UNCLOS. UNCLOS, as you know, is the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. UNCLOS. Mr. Reed.
Yes.
UNCLOS for us.
Okay. So the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea is the most important maritime convention in the world because it is also known as a constitution for the sea. Mm-hmm. It is known for the constitution for the sea because it is what governs maritime affairs in general. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea was signed in 1982, and with it being opened for signature and signed by its member states, it now meant that its member states were to adhere to all of the regulations found within it. There are a lot of regulations found in it. It is a very comprehensive document which outlines everything. I wouldn't even use the word outline. Details, I should say. Details everything you need to know about maritime affairs. It touches and concerns everything to do with the maritime industry and how governments, so countries, are to interact with the sea and with each other. So we see that the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea is, albeit that it is a convention that was signed before many of us were born, 1982, before most of us, and most of you listeners, before I was born, and I know I'm older than you, and it was done before I was born. So, with even how old it is something that is of extreme importance, which I'm sure you're going to have a lot of questions on.
Most definitely. So you mentioned that UNCLOS, it governs the member states, right?
Yes.
You use that term, member states. Then I've read and I see where Jamaica is one of the member states of UNCLOS. We were signees to the
we're
law.
signatories.
We're signatories.
Yes.
Thank you. What role then did Jamaica play in developing this monumental convention?
Jamaica was central, one of the countries that were very central to the development of the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the late Ambassador Eleanor Felix. She used to lecture at Caribbean Maritime University. She was a diplomat and an ambassador who represented Jamaica all over the world. And I had the privilege of talking with Ambassador Felix just 2 weeks before she died. Mm-hmm. And in that conversation, she gave me a lot of insight on the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea and Jamaica's role in it. We see that Jamaica played a very pivotal role because at the time, we still are a major seafaring country. And also what was happening was the world wanted to ensure that they had a comprehensive document. Jamaica was very forward thinking, writing at the time, this is in the 1960s, writing in journals, international newspapers such as the Wall Street Journal and all other papers, the New York Times and all of that, of the importance of having a convention that would have the whole world on one footing with how the seas are to be dealt with. Because Jamaica, being an island state, knew the importance of the sea, because that is where we get a lot of our resources from, and we capitalize very heavily on it. Our tourism market is built on the sea, on having that. So therefore we see that Jamaica has played a very pivotal role. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea was actually signed right here in Montego Bay, Jamaica.
Yes.
So, and Ambassador Felix, once again, of blessed memory, she was at that signing and she told me about that monumental day, witnessing such a monumental occasion in Jamaica's history and the world history of it. So Jamaica was always quite pivotal in it. Jamaica was one of the forerunners that pushed for the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea. And when it came for signing, other countries around the world wanted signing to be done in their country, because you get bragging rights.
Yeah.
In the legal world, you get bragging rights when a convention, an international convention is signed in your country, because the nickname for the convention is now your country. The city that it was signed in, and it was signed in Montego Bay, Jamaica. So example, when I go on seminars, people tease me and say, "Oh, Mr. Montego Bay Convention," because the nickname for the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea is the Montego Bay Convention, because that's where it was signed. So because of that, Jamaica got that nickname, the Montego Bay Convention. Well, I should say, UNCLOS got the nickname, the Montego Bay Convention. And as such, we see that Jamaica has played a very pivotal role in ensuring that it upholds the standards of the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea. We spoke about already the International Seabed Authority. The International Seabed Authority was born because of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. That convention made mention of the various zones of the sea. And one of the zones that they make mention of is the high seas. And in the high seas, it speaks of what can be done. There's a section of the high seas called the seabed, which is the deep ocean floor, for lack of a better word. So the ocean floor, how are the resources there going to be handled? And the international community was of the view that they needed to have an international seabed authority to deal with it, to govern it. Exactly. And the view of, at the time, of the ambassador, an ambassador named Avid Padro, gave a speech. He gave I believe it was a 9 or 10 hour speech, only stopping to sip water.
Imagine sitting in a 10-hour speech. That's not something I want to ever do in this life.
One of my lecturers, when I was studying in Europe, said that he was at that he was at the meeting at the United Nations conference, I should say, when Ambassador Padro gave that 9-hour speech, and he said it was the longest speech he ever sat through. But by the end of it, the international community all understood its significant importance that we needed to have an international seabed authority. And so when the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea was drafted, one of the regulations that was brought out was how we would handle the high seas. And in dealing with the high seas, it made mention of the seabed and said that there needs to be an international seabed authority. And which country was selected for the International Seabed Authority to be in? Jamaica.
Again.
So it is located, the International Seabed Authority is located downtown Kingston, right here. And it ensures that the seabed is being dealt with properly. Major international conferences take place there on how the seabed should be handled and other parts of the ocean. So we see that Jamaica has played a very pivotal role and continues to play a pivotal role in this.
So guys, in a nutshell, Mr. Reed just gave us a myriad of roles that Jamaica has played in helping to develop significantly this convention. I mean, we as such a small island have been very influential in international maritime affairs. Right, so my since the inception of UNCLOS, Mr. Reed,
yes,
what then has been the significance to the international community, right? For example, I mean, with COVID-19 being so rampant, it's very prevalent. Right now, we see the world quaking at the very thought of COVID-19.
yes,
We see where they have been, scientists are looking for a cure.
yes,
Right? We mentioned that UNCLOS governs the sea, right? They say that healing can be found in nature.
yes,
Right. So what if it is what then is the case? How do you go? How do you think it would be best in keeping with UNCLOS for a country that, for example, has the cure in a particular species, whether a plant or a sea creature? Then, how do you think then that UNCLOS would what significance does UNCLOS play in the international community then?
Okay, so I get that seems sounds like a two-part question. So the importance of UNCLOS to the international community,
Yes.
and also to let's say
Potential
finding a cure, as it may be for COVID-19 or maybe even any other disease.
Yes.
So let me handle the first part of it. To the international community, as I said, the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea is signed by the majority of countries around the world. So they have to uphold the standards. It states how you are to treat with other countries' zones. So it speaks of the territorial sea, the exclusive economic zone, the high seas, all of that. It makes countries know where they stand with each. In terms of going in somebody's territorial sea, signatories to this convention know that we uphold this convention, and by signing it, we know that we will not just enter somebody's territorial sea without their permission. You have what you have called innocent passage. You may pass through the person's country. So you have that. You also have, in terms of the international community, they understand that everything that is done must be governed. So the high seas, there's no law for the high seas, but UNCLOS has put it that you must be registered to sail the high seas, and any person not registered is a stateless vessel and can be boarded.
Remember, guys, we had already been through the registration and documentation aspect of. So here it comes back again. So if you didn't get to that part of our podcast, please ensure that you go to watch that video. It's very, very important. You will hear registration and documentation coming back a whole lot.
Yes.
Continue, Mr.
Yes. So the international community understands that all of these things have been laid down. In terms of how they're to be governing themselves, their interactions with each country. So therefore they know what they can and cannot do. Now that leads me straight into the part 2, I would call it, of your question, where you said no, that if there should be a cure. No, significance, once again, that's a major significance to the international community. Let's just say, for argument's sake, it is found that the cure for COVID is in Jamaica's territorial waters. Can other countries just come in and begin extracting it? No, because once again, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea anticipated situations
like this
where countries may want to go into somebody else's territorial sea because there's something of social value or economic value. The territorial sea is your zone. That 200 nautical miles is yours. if somebody wants to come into that 200 nautical miles to extract, whether it be the flora or fauna, so plants or animal life, flora and fauna, if somebody wants to go there and get any of those things, they have to get permission from the state. So you cannot just go because you hear that the cure for COVID is in Jamaica's territorial waters and you have the equipment that can excavate this, and Jamaica doesn't have the equipment. It means the developed first world country that has this equipment can just come in and put their ship in our territorial water and begin extracting. No, that is not right. I mentioned earlier innocent passage. You're allowed, once again, the international community, you're allowed to pass through somebody's territorial waters with innocent passage. You're not stopping, you're just continuing for this process of going on about your business. If you're going to stop in somebody's territorial waters, you need to inform them.
Yes.
And even worse, if you're going to do marine scientific research, and that is exactly what it is called under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. If you're going to conduct marine scientific research in somebody's territorial waters, you need to get their express written consent. Notice, expressed written consent. It cannot be oral, it must be written. So once it is written, and the two countries would interact with each other by way of correspondence using their foreign ambassadors and everything, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for the respective countries would speak and find out if it is in fact okay for the two countries to do business, and then they can allow for marine scientific research. And a country can deny it. A country has every right to deny another country marine scientific research in their territorial waters, but they have to give good reason. Because let's just say, using it again, COVID-19 as an example, if it is found that the cure is in our territorial waters, we cannot just deny somebody. We have to give them good reason. It has to be that maybe we find that the way they may excavate it may destroy our entire marine environment, which is a marine economy, which is a very fragile economy. Yes. So we want to ensure we uphold it properly. So therefore, we may deny them, say to them, no, you're not in agreement with how you're just going to come and extract it. We think you need to find a more environmentally friendly way. Yeah. So you see, we've not given them a whole denial, but we've said to them why. We've given reasons. So that is when you can deny somebody. You have to give reasons. Once they know that they are aware that there's something in your waters that can be of value to the international community, you have to give reasons for denying.
Okay. Alright, so then Mr. Reed, you're saying then that UNCLOS helps to avoid legal disputes between international neighbors then?
I don't want to use the word avoid. We will never be able to avoid legal disputes, and I hope we don't, because then they'll be out of a job. We do our best to minimize legal disputes. So we put the necessary laws, rules, and regulations in place to try and ensure that legal disputes either that we keep them at a minimum or that we try and control them. So how that is done through the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea is they have a section in there called settlement of disputes. If you have a dispute with another country and both countries are members to this United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, the convention states that persons who have that problem may now send their problem, their dispute, to the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, ITLOS, based in Hamburg, Germany. Yes. And at ITLOS, it is a specialized court that deals with maritime issues.
Maritime disputes.
All maritime disputes arising under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea are dealt with there. So once it is a maritime dispute, the two countries can go there. And even if two countries are not signatories to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, they can still use it because they don't turn anybody away. Once you have a dispute with the marine environment and you cannot have it resolved just by a mediation, a trained mediator sitting and talking with you, you may carry it to the next level, which would be the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. If you dispute their jurisdiction that you don't want them to do it, you can also carry it to the ICJ, International Court of Justice, based in the Hamburg, Germany. But it would, of course, be advised that you go to the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea because those judges are experts in maritime affairs. They are certified maritime lawyers who've risen to the highest level of being a maritime judge.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Reed, then. Throughout my reading, right, I've come across a term, archipelagic state.
Yes.
Right? And as you may know, an archipelago is an extensive group of islands. They have something in common that brings them together to say, okay, this is one archipelago apart from the other one. Right. Then, Mr. Reid, what is the significance of this United Nations Convention, the Law of the Sea, to archipelagic states like Jamaica?
Excellent question. So, countries around the world all have various issues with their maritime space and how they're going to deal with it. Jamaica is a part of what we call an archipelago, a chain of islands, as you have said. So, what the United Nations Convention understands is that when it comes to archipelagic states, it is harder for you to delimit your border because each country is given 200 nautical miles for their territorial sea. The problem that arises with archipelagic states is that your neighbor might be closer than 200 nautical miles to you. Example, Cuba to Jamaica, Cayman to Jamaica. Those are neighbors that are very close to us. They're less than 200 nautical miles. So what this now means is that we're now in this archipelago. The United Nations Convention Law of the Sea states that for archipelagic states, you must delimit your space. That is, you must mark out your part. And this is done very technical once again. They call in the various technocrats in the industry, and they will mark out where your territorial sea ends and the other person's own begins. Because the problem is the United Nations Convention Law of the Sea gives each country 200 nautical miles. But what happens when a country has less than that? Example, like how I've said, an archipelago. They have less than that. So therefore we see once again that the United Nations Convention Law of the Sea has addressed all the issues. So they make sure that these countries know how their seas are delimited, and this is for obvious reasons, to stop overfishing, to stop things occurring in your waters, to be able to patrol your waters. Yeah. All of that is done. So the United Nations Convention Law of the Sea anticipates that these things will happen, and therefore it says archipelagic states, you must find a way to delimit, and you must come to an agreement in delimiting it, and it is upheld under the United Nations Convention Law of the Sea. So you're not in breach of UNCLOS if you decide to delimit and state how much both sides need to agree.
Thank you. You mentioned the term delimit several times in your discussion just now.
Yes.
In your so what I want for you to do then is can you just go in depth a little bit more? What is maritime delimitation?
Okay, maritime delimitation, that is now speaking to basically marking a border, trying to establish the borders in the sea, where one country ends, or one country's territorial waters, I should say, ends, and the other one begins. And it's not as simple as people think, where you just find the middle. No, there are lots of things that have to be taken into consideration. It is a very technical process. We have done it. We have one with Cuba. We have one with Colombia, because Jamaica, our territory, our maritime space is quite big, so we've had to delimit it. So we have to have agreements with various countries on how it is that we are going to deal with this maritime space. And these contracts are very detailed. As a matter of fact, it's detailed stating that if anything is found on whose part, who has claim to it. So if oil should be found on one side, who has claim to the oil and in how much proportion, all of that. That's what maritime delimitation is.
Thank you. Well, it is known that Jamaica has more sea space or more marine space than we do land space.
Yes.
Right? Under UNCLOS, what problems could this possibly pose for neighboring states, since we're in an archipelago?
Well, once again, as I had said earlier, just had overfishing, not the resources found there in these states. all of these things now are going to be a major concern. So therefore, we need to delimit the space. And by delimiting the space, we now know when somebody's overfishing our waters. We know when somebody's doing illegal activities in our waters, and we'll know where the jurisdiction is for our waters. So where does the Coast Guard, where does their jurisdiction begin and end?
Yeah.
When have they gone into another country's jurisdiction? So all of this is done because we have the less than 200 nautical miles. So we've had to do all of these things, and these are the obvious problems that arise. If oil should be found on the border between Colombia and Jamaica, who has claim?
Could it?
Exactly. All of that is made mention of in our agreement with Colombia. We have an agreement with Colombia.
Delimitation agreement.
Yes, a delimitation agreement we have with Colombia. And it's a very detailed, extensive agreement. I invite you to read it. And it speaks to all of that, how we will delimit resources found on the border, and how we will deal with overfishing, all of those things. And the agreement is done in both English and Spanish, because they're Spanish speaking. So it's done at everybody, and it's given with notice.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Reed. That is all the questions. Those are all the questions I have for you today. Thank you again for sharing with us your expertise. We thank you for the time that you've taken. Very, very important. Very, very important, Mr. Reed. We thank you for the time that you've taken to share with us. Right. Again, Jeremy Reed, ladies and gentlemen, owner of Reed Law and the Legal Transport Suites. Transportation Suites. Thank you again, Mr. Reed. Thank you.
Thank you very much once again for having me on your show.
All right. Good.